Hi everyone, Stepan here. Today I'm going to start covering the third tournament I played in a row a month ago, a month and a half. So after Silver Lake, which was by far the worst tournament so far that I've ever played, where I'd lost a little short of 40 points, and then Belgrade, in which I managed to gain about 10, I was still, well, in pretty bad shape, rating-wise and psychologically. And starting Paraćin, I wanted to do well. My only goal was to play well and to try and gain back the rating points I'd lost. In round one, I'd faced a very strong opponent, 2250 from Greece, who plays several different things, but mainly plays e4, and I was expecting to be going into the Caro-Kann. I did not expect the variation that we played, but I was still prepared for it. So he starts e4, c6, and then knight to c3, and we are most probably going into the two knights, which is an opening I've started to enjoy more and more. I've been studying it a lot, and I think black has excellent chances, both in the main line and in the sidelines, and I quite enjoy playing it now. Okay, d5, knight f3, and I went for bishop to g4, which I did not intend to do before the game, if he plays the two knights, but I sort of changed my mind. I wanted to play it safe with the thing I knew best. Okay, h3. It's possible to play bishop h5. As you are going to see in one of my later games, I did employ that as well. It gets much sharper, but bishop takes f3, queen f3, and e6 is the main setup. Now, white can do several different things. He could go for a setup with g3, which involves a kingside fianchetto and kingside castling. He could go d3, which involves much sharper play with bishop to d2, queenside castling, and then pawn to g4. Or he could go d4, which I think is the most principled way to play and also the most flexible. My opponent went g3, which I was happy to see. Knight to d7, bishop to g2, and now you can play knight f6 and then exchange, but I exchanged immediately. Queen takes e4, knight g2 f6, queen e2, this is all normal, has been played before. And now a slight deviation from the main setup that people play. Usually people play bishop to e7 here, but I've been enjoying playing the setup in which my bishop is on d6, my queen is on c7, and there's constant pressure on c3. I think that's way more active, and I don't see a clear way for white to refute that, because even if he gets in d3 or d4, he doesn't have time for bishop g5, pinning my knight. I always have time for h6, so I don't really see a downside to bishop d6 in comparison to bishop e7. In fact, I think this is a way more active square. Okay, he castles, I castle, and now pawn to a3. Pawn a3 is a strange move, I have to say. This is something I've never seen before in the variation, because it's not really clear how white is going to disrupt my queenside structure. He would have to get in b4 and then b5 and then take on c6, which takes too much time, and since the queen can never get to c2, there are never any tricks with knight b5 and stuff like that. Of course, I don't want to move my c-pawn, allowing knight b5, but a3, in my opinion, is quite slow. I think d4 is the most principled way to play. I played a5, and this basically puts the brakes on his plan. I think a5 is a better move than a3, and actually more useful, gaining more space, not giving up any squares because I have a pawn on c6. So, okay, d3. d3 makes sense in conjunction with a3. I think it's safer than d4. Still, I just played queen to c7. And now this battery is quite annoying for him. In many cases, I could end up not drawing the game with taking twice, but having annoying pressure on g3 and also on f2 if I ever manage to get in knight h5 or knight g4 or even knight d5 with the ideas of knight e3. Okay, he played bishop to d2, which is fine. I just developed rook f8, and here he surprised me. He played knight to d1. I know what this move was about. He wants to play b4 and then not lose a pawn. But I still think it's too slow. It gives me time to just make my pieces perfect. I played rook a to d8, which now all of my pieces are great. He plays b4. I exchanged. I don't think he's gained anything with this exchange. In fact, he wasted time on knight d1. And I also do manage to gain a tempo with knight to d5. And knight d5 firstly threatens to win a pawn, makes c4 impossible for the rest of the game unless he wants to lose a pawn with b5, and basically forces him to play c3, which means that the knight cannot go to c3. That being said, the knight has a nice route into c4, but I can always play b5. And I just brought my other knight into the game. Now, with this knight on f6, there are ideas of e5 and e4, which you should always keep an eye on as white, because if white can get in e5, if black can get in e5, that means that the center usually opens to black's advantage. He played rook e1, which is a smart move considering that maybe e5 is coming. h6, just making sure there are no pins, also giving my king some luft. In the event of e5, I don't want to get mated on the back rank. Knight b2 makes sense, as I said. The knight wants to come into c4. I never want to allow that, so I play b5. And I had a long think before b5, because the only way I can be worse in this position is if he can manage to double up his rooks on the a file and put tremendous pressure on me. However, with my queen being so actively placed and being able to go into b6, meaning that the g3 pawn is hanging, I played b5 because I always have ideas of queen b6 gaining a tempo on the g3 pawn and then undermining the protection of his rook on a5 with c5. And if he doesn't play rook a5, there's no other safe square for his rook. Okay, so he did play rook a5, and here I had the option to go e5 straight away. I'd been calculating that, but I wasn't really sure how good it was, so I didn't end up playing it, but I knew it couldn't be bad. I just thought that what I did was better. He probably plays rook a1 and I go e4. And now if this pawn is taken, I can just trade and go knight f6, and I'm going to get my piece back with a lot of pressure on g3, because once I get rid of the g2 bishop, it's much easier to create tricks. And you can see that my position is perfectly active. But instead of that, I decided to trade a pair of rooks with rook a8. He doubled, I took, he took, and now I went in for this, queen to b6. So my idea is pretty clear. I mean, I'm going to take on g3. For him, the engine just wants to retreat the rook. I'd analyzed this game 3 times, twice by myself and then once with the engine. And I was surprised to see that this is the best move. I didn't even consider this. By the way, I should mention that the engine thinks e5 was the best move on the previous turn for me. Thinks rook a8 is a slight inaccuracy. Okay, so the engine plays rook a2, and I just grab a pawn. He gets to play c4, and now bc4, dc4, knight f4. And the engine thinks this is fine for white. I mean, I would never, ever go in for this with white. I mean, I can understand why he didn't. And now queen e3, bishop e3, knight takes g2. How can this be good? I mean, this just seems tremendous for me. It's a clear pawn up. He has a 2-to-1 pawn majority, but if it ever moves, my knight gets the d5 square. The pawns are undefended. I just don't believe in this. The engine says it's equal, but I would much rather be black. In any case, he played king h1, and here I had a long think. I desperately wanted to make knight h5 work, and if he takes it, I think I'm okay. I wasn't sure if I'm winning or not, but I really did want to go in for this. So if queen h5, then queen f2, bishop hanging, pawn hanging with mate threats, So he plays queen to d1, I play queen takes g3, he has to play queen to g1, and now I was looking at knight f4. But after this is traded, I don't think I have anything. I think white should be okay. Yeah, so I didn't go in for this. The other thing is, after knight h5, he has this extremely tricky move, knight to c4, and after bc4, dc4, my knight is hanging, he's threatening c5, and I basically lose the game. So this I did not see during the game. This I found during my analysis and confirmed it with the engine later on. In fact, white is about +1 here. So instead of going for that, I simply played rook to b8. My idea is to go c5 on the next move. I should have played c5 straight away. It was just as strong here. I can just play c5, undermining the rook. The pawn cannot be taken. And his best move, as was the case later when I did play c5, is c4. And now I simply go cb4. If he takes my knight, I take the rook. So he has to play rook b5. And I play queen a6. Still, if he takes the knight, I take the rook. So probably play something like queen d1 and then knight c7 and rook b7, knight cd5, and this should be a draw. We just have to repeat the position. But I have a passed pawn, and I'm happy. Instead of that, I played rook b8 first. I don't want to allow him c4 and then rook takes b5 later on. And in this position, he surprised me. He played knight to d1, which is a strange move considering the situation on the board. What he should do, I think, is c4, just seizing the opportunity to play this before... no, maybe not c4. Wait, I'm not sure. Maybe he just retreats the rook. Maybe just rook a1 here. And saying that, okay, you can play c5 and I can trade it off without losing the rook. Still, I think I should be better, but retreating the rook should have been the best move. Instead of that, he played knight d1. And at this point, I had about, I think, 45 minutes on the clock. He had about 25 minutes on the clock. And I wasn't sure about all the variations. Fear crept in. I didn't want to blunder and lose. And after about 10 minutes thought, I played c5 and offered a draw. I knew that I had to be slightly better, but I knew that I had to play precisely. And all the variations that were possible were by no means completely clear to me. What was clear to me is that either I win a pawn or I win the exchange, but he has a ton of activity. And he thought for about 15 minutes and accepted the draw, which I wish he didn't. I mean, I was a coward that day, and hopefully I will be braver next time. The idea behind c5 is, again, undermining the rook, and this time with my rook on b8, he has no tricks. He said after the game, we went out to analyze the game together, that he would have given up the exchange in a second had I not offered the draw. He saw c5, he was intending to play bc5, and in my mind this just loses. He thought this was good, so queen a5, cd6, and the engine agrees with me. It's -4 for black. It's just completely over. I mean, he has given up the exchange for pretty much nothing. I'm going to round up this pawn eventually, so I don't know, I go queen a6, I'm pinning from this and just try to pick up the pawn. So this, had he played that, I probably would have won the game. Maybe not, but probably. What I was calculating was c4, which is the best move. And after this move, I do win a pawn. So bc4, dc4, knight b4. Fine. Rook b5 is not as strong anymore, because after queen a7, I'm going to trade this rook. My rook is on b8. Probably knight c3, and then rook takes b5, knight takes b5, queen a1 check, something like here and here. And this is a clean pawn up. However, he has the bishop pair. He still has a pawn on c4, which could be dangerous. His knight is quite good on b5, and I wasn't too sure about this position and how good it was for me. So basically, this is what I saw before I offered the draw. And I thought, okay, it's better to take a draw. He could accept it because I'm a pawn up, and maybe he doesn't want to risk, and he did accept it. This position is slightly better for black. It's not a whole pawn according to the engine, it's minus 0.5. It's perfectly playable for white. I still think it's riskier for black to play. I still have that feeling, and I'm not sure if holding on to this pawn will not give white too much activity. So maybe in the future I would have to give this pawn up to try and consolidate or to grab back the bishop pair. And if we do trade off these two, it should probably end in a draw in any case. So I was happy with the game. I'm not happy that I offered the draw. I shouldn't have offered the draw. If I were playing a weaker player, I never would have offered it. I would have tried to win. And I wish that in the future I managed to have enough courage to pretend that I'm playing weaker opponents every time, and that when I have a better position, I play on and try to win against people regardless of their rating. I wasn't brave enough this game. Okay, so this was round 1 of Paraćin. I will cover round 2 tomorrow. And yeah, stay tuned for more chess. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, leave them below. Bye-bye.